So, welcome once again to another magisterial live stream for modernists. I will wait here for a few moments until I see people start showing up in the chat before we really get going. Till then, you can admire this new Magneto skin. With the Krakoa logo. And once I see some folks, ooh, they already took out the thing where you could choose the new map. So I can't take us directly to the new map, even though there is a new map. Hey everybody, people are filtering in. You can see the new Magneto skin. I do not have a convenient way to show you the new map, however. Because I was out of town last week when I was able to select it. I'm doing well. Creatricia's doing well. The dogs are all doing well. So all is well. You know, I hadn't noticed that, but with that green there, yeah, he is kind of doing Mardi Gras color. Is this part of the whole Rogue Gambit Magneto love triangle thing? Is that where all this is going? Not a ton of new stuff. Some new costumes in the shop. This is the only one that I wanted to get. I saw someone's in Australia, so tell me what it's like tomorrow. You can give me advance warning. Well, what answer was I expecting? Of course, the future is bleak in Australia. It's a post-atomic wasteland. I've seen documentaries about it. A whole series of Mad Max documentaries about what it's like in Australia. So. So yes, there's a new map. But unfortunately, because I was out of town last week at a retreat, I couldn't really stream the new map. And they took out the option to just select that map. And therefore, I don't have a good way of getting that map. But said map is the Collector's Museum. So it's full of, like, Marvel Easter eggs. And you escort Deadpool's short bus through it. As he tries to swipe stuff from the collector. Oh yeah, that's true. I guess I can do a custom game. You'll have to ask, you'll have to ask, my wife about the plants. She has been dealing with them. Yeah. So that said, oh, okay. If she's in the chat, she could give you more details. The weather has not been helpful lately, vis-a-vis the plants. So here's the other. They added this Mecha Groot skin. And then they added this Angela skin. And this Emma Frost skin. Which is, shall we say, typical of most Emma Frost skins. But we could go ahead with questions. We're getting close to the beginning of the second half of the season when they're releasing Elsa Bloodstone as a character.
Oh, pick me, please.
Frog Thor is moderately a thing.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3, 2.
So, in terms of Liturgy of St. James being its own animal, what I was getting at is the Liturgy of St. Basil the Great, Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. We call them that. The difference is the anaphoras, right, that were written by St. John and St. Basil respectively. But they're the same basic liturgy. They're the same basic structure. And that basic structure comes from the Ephesian liturgy tradition, which goes back to St. Paul and St. John in Ephesus. That's why it's called that. It's a typical liturgical structure in Asia Minor. The Liturgy of St. James ultimately goes back, as I say, to St. James. So it comes from Jerusalem. It's from the Jerusalem liturgical tradition. That's still where it's still primarily celebrated, is in the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And so that's a whole separate line of liturgical development. So the basic structure of it yes, I have. In the stream talked about the 13th. I'll probably mention it again when we get closer to the end here.
I'm not ready
So
to give
the
up yet.
like if you walk into, if you're used to going to an Eastern Rite Orthodox church and you're used to the liturgy of St. Basil the Great, St. John Chrysostom, you probably can't even tell the difference for sure until you get to the anaphora. Although some of the settings will be sort of longer. Right, because it's the same basic structure. And you can go to, you know, even if you went to like a Greek church and you don't know any Greek, or you went to like a Serbian church and didn't know any Serbian, you'll probably kind of follow along because the structures are the same. But if you walk into a liturgy of St. James, you'll be like, wait, what? And you kind of won't know what's coming next because the basic structure is different. Now that said, you know, people say like, oh, it's the liturgy that St. James celebrated in the first century in Jerusalem. And it's like, well, it originated with that. But for example, when they celebrate the liturgy of St. James today, everybody recites the Nicene Creed. Well, obviously, St. James, the brother of the Lord, hadn't heard the Nicene Creed in the first century, right? So it's not identical to what he did, but that's the origination of it. Just like the origination of our more typical liturgies is in the church in Ephesus. The Our Lady of Guadalupe Pachamama thing was a sarcastic comment. I know some of you aren't Gen X. Some of you, therefore, occasionally treat some of my comments as sincere. So I'm not in favor in general of casting lots and that kind of thing to make decisions. I mean, that said, if we're talking about, like, one of your buddies wants to go to Taco Bell and you want to go to McDonald's and you flip a coin to decide which one, like, I don't think, oh, you have committed the sin of divination, your blood is upon your own hands. Like, you know. But I think important decisions in life, we don't have a promise from God that he's going to reveal his will by those sorts of means. Favorite Old Testament book is probably Deuteronomy. Favorite New Testament. That's tough. Probably the Gospel of John, though. Well, Harvey Dent is suffering from an advanced case of obsessive convulsive disorder with the whole coin flipping thing. And so the whole idea of OCD is that you develop, or one of the major symptoms of OCD is that you develop rituals to which you attach cosmic significance. Right. If you don't, I mean, people with really advanced OCD will think that, like, oh, if I don't, you know, do this certain thing a certain number of times in a certain way, I'll die. Right. Like, and so you sort of create these rituals and invest them with significance. So what Harvey Dent is doing is a kind of divination, but it's basically, it's more about mental illness than the sin of divination. Yeah, so in terms of quote-unquote the Septuagint, well, let me do quickly. That inscription is referring to a sacred tree, or pole, which would be a giant sculpted phallus, not to a goddess, because of the form of the word. The ending on the word Asherah there, if you look at the original inscription, isn't the ending that's used to refer to a goddess. It's the one that's used to refer to a cultic pole or tree. But so, yeah, I'm going to get on Alex about this because, yeah. But, so the quote-unquote, the Septuagint, the work of the 70, is a translation of the Torah, of the Pentateuch. It was made in Alexandria in the 3rd century BC by 70 rabbis. That's what it is. That's what the fathers are talking about when they refer to the work of the 70. See St. Jerome's prologue to Genesis, for example. He wrote prologues. St. Jerome wrote prologues to every book of the Bible that he translated, by the way. They're worth checking out. And so the rest of the Old Testament, plus books that are in some people's Old Testaments and not others, were translated into Greek over the course of the next couple of centuries. In most cases. Like the Book of Wisdom, sometimes called the Wisdom of Solomon, is from the 1st century AD and was written in Greek. It wasn't translated from anything. And the fathers knew that. That's why if you look at the earliest places where the fathers refer to wisdom as canonical, they have it listed as part of the New Testament, not the Old Testament. Because they knew it was written in Greek. They knew it was written in the time period when the other New Testament books were written. But so that was over the intervening centuries. But the real important part of this question is where you asked, what are the New Testament writers quoting? Because this is one of the things you'll get steered wrong by a lot of popular Orthodox apologists on this, into making a potentially critical error, especially if you try to use this in debate. It is true that something like 83% of the quotes of the Old Testament quotes of the New Testament match the Old Greek, that first tier of Greek translations. Right? That is true. However, 67% of them match the Masoretic text. And you say, well, how could that be? Well, because most of the Greek is a translation of the Hebrew text that became the Masoretic text. So all of the places where it's just a straightforward Greek translation, right, essentially those two texts match. And so and since those texts match, we can't say for sure which the author was quoting, right? The author could have, like St. Paul knew the Hebrew, he could have been just translating the Hebrew into Greek in his head, right? And it matches, the Greek and the Hebrew match there, so we can't tell which it is. So, yeah, that's an overlap. So what that means is there's actually only about 16% of the quotes, of the Old Testament quotes of the New Testament, that match the Old Greek over against the Hebrew, where the Hebrew meaning the Proto-Masoretic text, and the Greek disagree, right? About 17% of the time, 16 or 17% of the time, it follows the Greek. And that seems like, okay, well, that's still substantial. But here's the problem. Remember I said like 83% matches the Old Greek? That means there's 17% of the quotes, of the Old Testament quotes in the New Testament, don't match either the Masoretic Hebrew or the Old Greek. Meaning they're either being free translated by the author from Hebrew, they're being translated from Aramaic in some cases. Right? So there was all those things. Meaning the places where the New Testament favors the Greek over the Masoretic Hebrew is about the same number of places that the Bible doesn't, very patently does not use the Greek. So there's the same number of times where it's using the Greek in particular as that it's not using the Greek in particular. So you can't making these conclusions like, oh, the apostles all use quote-unquote the Septuagint, even if we want to be more correct and call it the Old Greek. You can't prove that. Some of them definitely did, for some of the quotes. But there's a lot of quotes where you can't prove where they got them, whether it's the Hebrew or the Greek tradition. And there's also a lot of quotes where we don't know at all where they're quoting from. Exactly. So yeah, it's much more complicated than that. And that's because in the 1st century AD, they didn't even have a settled list of canonical books, let alone a particular text of those books that they considered canonical. So they quote all over the place. Hey, number 4. Let me adjust the mic a little bit and see if that helps. So I didn't see that last bit. I saw something about not having an important question and then something about maybe St. Cyril. But I didn't see which St. Cyril. And I know I missed a few other things in there too, so if people want to pop up some reposts. Of questions I missed, I will happily do those. Yes, I've seen both seasons of Severance. I like season 1 better than season 2, but I'm not like tapped out on season 2. I'm not like, oh, season 2 is bad, I'm not going to watch anymore. St. Cyril's commentary on Isaiah is really good. So, the whole thing with the goats in Severance, originally was thrown into season 1 with no rhyme or reason to it. And then they turned it into a sacrificial ritual thing. They're sort of doubling down on the whole cult of Kyr thing. So we'll have to kind of see where that goes. I have not played War Thunder. I'm working on it in Marvel Rivals. Yeah, I do not know of a source for the claim that Christ showed St. James the structure of the liturgy. I don't think that's something that would have needed to have happened because the structures of the liturgy come from the structures of temple worship and the synagogue structures. So there's not sort of this radical discontinuity where the liturgy is something totally different than St. James would have ever seen before. I certainly think the Holy Spirit was guiding St. James and the other apostles in terms of how they adapted those traditional forms of Jewish worship within the context of Jesus being the Messiah. But yeah. I don't know what the Iron Lung movie is about. I need to repost on that St. John Chrysostom question. I just missed it. I've got this lingering cough, so I'm also muting and unmuting myself here. Try not to, like, cough in your ears. If you're getting weird bloops or blips or something, or if I'm blanking out temporarily. That's what that is.
Happy birthday!
I've seen wonders out there in the cosmos few humans will ever behold.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So, in terms of the whole duty versus sincere love thing, for almost giving her anything else, sincerity is super overrated. In fact, I would go so far as to say sincerity is not in and of itself a virtue. Very sincere people have very sincerely done horribly evil things that they fully meant to do and stand by. That's like the concept of a high-handed sinner. So the way you foster a deep love for the poor and the needy is by spending your life faithfully doing your duty. By doing your duty to Christ and giving to the poor and the needy, right? Love is an action, it's not a feeling. The love we're talking about, the love that's important, is an action, not a feeling. It's not an emotion. Sorry, millennials, if there are any in the chat. That's good news for me, because that means I can do it.
I have a shield, but no complaints.
But, and that's why, right, the Latin translation of caritas and the way that's come to form the English word charity is actually helpful in this regard, because it helps us think of actions rather than feelings. God is concerned about what we do and what we say. That's what we're judged by, not by how we felt about it. So yeah, the example I give, this is part of the idea of faithfulness, right? If you're married to someone, right? You don't spend, unless you're me and my wife, we're America's sweethearts, right? But we're in a different category. But most marriages, you're not constantly looking adoringly at each other, right? And just constantly experiencing this depth of romantic love, right? Even when one of you is like sick and vomiting, and that's et cetera, having a bad day and being right. That kind of stuff still happens, right? You're not just constantly feeling these emotions, okay? But what determines whether you have a real marriage and whether you love your spouse or not is not how often you're feeling lovey-dovey, or how consistently you're feeling lovey-dovey. It's about how you act, whether you're feeling that way or not. You don't, right? If anytime you're not feeling it, you go and you're unfaithful to your spouse, or you treat them badly, or you treat them unkindly, right? Because, hey, I don't want to be fake, your marriage is not going to last very long. Right? In fact, your behavior when you're not feeling it is precisely what defines the quality of your commitment. Right? Same thing with a friendship. Same thing with your family members. The way you behave toward them and treat them when you're not feeling particularly loving and, they're not being particularly adorable. That's what defines, right, the quality of your character and the quality of the relationship. And the same is true with our relationship with God. Right? That even when we're not feeling particularly close to God, even when we don't have this sort of swell of piety in our bosom, that we still do what God has commanded us to do, because it's what we're called to do, and it's our duty, right? That's a good thing. And that's what then produces the feeling. When you're married and you're not feeling those things, right, which again is never the case for me and my wife, but for other couples, and you're not feeling those things, right, the way you get to feeling them again is that you remain faithful and you remain loving, and your actions and your words portray the love that maybe you're not feeling in the moment. And by continuing to faithfully do those things, the feelings and emotions return. So, if you don't particularly feel a devotion to giving alms to the poor, that makes it more important that you give alms to the poor. Because it is out of helping people and showing that love, which is the love of God, not your own love, ultimately. That's where you will start to experience that love. Strong's Concordance is
I've seen wonders out there in the cosmos
anti-useful.
few humans will ever behold.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3.
And what I mean by anti-useful is that it will cause you to come to false conclusions. Because what Strong's Concordance is going to do is just tell you all the places where a word is used. And that makes it very easy to jump to conclusions that, oh, well, every place this word is used, it means the same thing, right? This word is used here. Oh, well, it's also used here. So it must mean the same thing or a similar thing in both places. And that, of course, isn't true, right? Imagine if you took a book, just a novel, right? And you said, okay, I'm going to look up every time in this novel that the author uses the word green, right? Okay, here's all the places he uses the word green. And you say, so whenever he uses the word green, the author means X. And we can make these connections between these places where he uses the word. But let's say in the novel, there's a scene where people go golfing, and he uses green to mean part of a golf course. And another part, he's talking about someone being envious. And he says the person looked positively green to indicate that they were jealous. And then in another place, he just says that somebody's shirt is green. Right? If you try to draw all of those together just because they use the same word, you're going to misinterpret all of those passages. Or at least 2 of them. 2 out of the 3, right?
A force field. They found my weak spot.
So, yeah. So that's why I say it can actually mislead you. I have not read that book by Pence. I grow my beard by being lazy and not shaving or taking care of it as often as I should. Not trimming it and stuff. So that's my trick, just sloth. Your mileage may vary if you likewise exercise sloth. So somebody asked about the Church of Finland and the Gregorian calendar. Unless you're part of the Church of Finland, I don't think you need to have a lot of thoughts or feelings about it. That's been the case for the Church of Finland ever since it became they've done it. They're in communion with all the other churches and bishops of the Orthodox world, and so that's just how it is. That actually came up. Their use of the Western Piscalian actually came up at the retreat that I was at, because I made a comment at the retreat that if you really learn Orthodox Church history, you learn that every single canon in existence in the Orthodox Church has had an exception made to it at one point or another, in one place or another. And someone said to me, oh yeah? Where did they make an exception to the date of Pascha? And I said, the Church of Finland. Right? So it is one case of that being the case.
I'm not ready to give up yet.
So yeah, the sort of a test case of understanding how canons work in the Orthodox Church, which is different than how they work in, say, Rome. Have people gotten ads yet? Do I need to make my ad spiel? I'm seeing lulls in the chat, but I never know if that's ads or just a lull in the chat. Because people are in awe of how I'm lazily playing the Maker right now.
I'm more resilient than you think.
An extra force field. Disappear!
I will probably not end up playing Amboria. I'll probably take a look at it, but
Plasma burst! Watch me
Against the world.
Royal Rumble was really boring. That was my thought. I am glad we're getting Roman Reigns versus CM Punk, though. That at least is an interesting match that we haven't seen in years. Oh, you haven't really seen it. Like, they're different people now. Than...
Well, you can't expect to win them all.
I'm trying to think about if there's secondary sources about Scripture and Holy Week in particular. I think the Bible and the Holy Fathers, for Orthodox Christians, that book that goes in and out of print from St. Vladimir's, like the green hardcover book, I think it has a section on Holy Week. And that's just a collection of patristic quotations and stuff trying to connect things. So that might be a good starting point. So why do they think the Divine Liturgy is inaccessible to people looking into the Orthodox? I mean, in the sense that, is it like the service itself, the structure is weird, they think? Or is this a language issue?
I've seen wonders out there in the cosmos few humans will ever behold.
Because if it's a language issue, I mean, that may be the case, right? Depending on how much, if you're going to a church where the whole liturgy is done entirely in Church Slavonic, the average American walking it off the street is going to find that kind of inaccessible if he's never been to an Orthodox church before. If we're not talking about a language issue, if we're talking about just the structure itself, which people sometimes say, this is one of the arguments that people have used for the Western Rite stuff, that like, oh, it's Eastern, it's foreign, right? I would point out that every single major Roman Catholic apologist that you've heard of on the internet goes to a Byzantine Rite church. So, you know, yeah, if it's, they don't know what's being said, well, again, they not know what's being said because of the language, or they not know what's being said because they have trouble paying attention. Because, for example, I find, oh, the chanting, they just don't like the, yeah. So, the chanting they find hard to understand. I think the key there is they need to, so people feel that way and then they want to use books. And like, the worst thing they can do is try to use books. In fact, a lot of the people who come to me with things like that, part of what's confusing them is that they're trying to use books. Because most of the service books we have, I mean, not most, none of the service books we have all the variables for every week of the year. They can't. Right? That would be like a 3,000 page book. You're not going to have that in the pews. So people are trying to follow along with books. They get to one of the parts where the hymns change every week, and then that's not printed there, and they're trying to follow along by reading And they end up getting really confused and frustrated. And even though they won't think this, I mean, honestly, one of the keys to them getting past that is going to be them putting the book down completely. And just listening and paying attention. And attending the liturgy for a year or two and just getting used to it. That's honestly what will help fix it. If you try to follow along in a book and then you can't follow along in a book, yeah, you're going to get confused. But that's not how Christians have worshipped historically. There were no books. And people couldn't read anyway. Right? You didn't come into liturgy and get like a copy of the hymns, right? And in fact, you know, for most of that history it was being done in Greek and not contemporary Greek. It was being done in basically biblical Greek, which isn't a language that regular Greeks can understand. Yes, they have always chanted.
This is real firepower.
But my point is, for most of Orthodox history, it wasn't even being chanted in a language that was easily understood by them. Right? Slavonic versus spoken Russian, same thing. Right? And they didn't have a book. They came in and they just listened. And you learn the rhythms of it. You learn the hymns. Right? You learn what the things mean. Like in my church, we sing, there's a lot of stuff that we sing multiple times, do the Lord's Prayer multiple times, in English and in Arabic and Greek. And like half of the people there who are converts who have been coming for a few years basically know the Lord's Prayer in Arabic now, even though they don't know the Arabic otherwise. And know some of the hymns in Arabic and sing along with them. And that's not even a language they know. But they've gotten used to it. And they know what they're singing, right? Because they've learned over time. And so that's... the Orthodox Church never has been and never will be easy access in the sense that you can just... Any random person can walk it off the street and understand everything that's happening. Trying to make it that way, the whole seeker-sensitive thing, is part of what finished off evangelical Protestantism and made it completely irrelevant.
There's still more work.
Only 60 seconds left.
Yeah, it's like at the Royal Rumble, the Royal Rumble this year is a wrestling event that I was just talking about, for those of you who don't follow wrestling. It was held in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, okay? And during the matches, they were doing English and European soccer chants. The Saudis there, okay? Who are Arabic speakers, obviously, right? But they do those chants, right? Because you sing them at soccer games. They're soccer fans, right? And they do certain English chants and stuff. And do what they meant. So it's the same kind of thing, right? Yeah, if it's your first soccer game, you're like, what are they doing, right? Your 100th soccer game, you're singing along.
Another epic victory.
So I assume the question about they went out from us because they were not of us is because of the way the Calvinists want to flip that around. And say, oh, that means that anytime someone seems to have renounced Christianity, it means they were never Christians in the first place. Which is wildly acontextual. Like, talk about something, just ripping something out of the context. Right? St. John is not talking about just in general what happens when people apostatize. He's talking about a specific group of people. A specific group of false teachers and their disciples who had left the specific church he's writing to. And so St. John is saying those people who left, they were never really part of us anyway. Right? Those particular they were always false teachers. right? And the people who they drew off after themselves as disciples, they were only able to do that because those people were never really part of us. So that doesn't mean that applies to everyone in every case, right? But you can certainly think of examples of this where that would apply, right? How many people have you seen who present themselves as, oh, I don't know, a former Orthodox priest online, and when you hear them talk about Orthodoxy, it very quickly becomes clear that they never really understood it, right? Like you're like, how can you have been Orthodox, let alone got somebody to ordain you in the Orthodox Church, and you don't understand this, you don't know this, right? I didn't name any names, right? But you can look at that and say, well, he never really got it, and maybe he could have gotten it and still would have left. I don't know, right? It's a counterfactual. We can't know for sure. God knows. But we can definitely look at the situation as it stands and say, well, yeah, he left because he never really got it. He was never really on board with the program in the first place, right? He wasn't really one of us Orthodox Christians. And since he wasn't, of course he left, right? So, but yeah, taking that statement that St. John is making that particular case and generalizing from that no one who's ever really a Christian ever stops being a Christian is bizarre. And then wilder than that, when you actually get into it with those people, they then have to do all of this sort of weird three-card monte about whether that person ever thought they were a Christian. Because Calvin says that God will give people faith for a period of time and then take it away. Because they weren't really elect. So there's a certain number of non-elect people, Calvin says, who God gives faith to temporarily and then takes it away. Right? And that's how he explains the fact that some of those people who you're going to say, oh, they were never really Christians when they left. Before they left, they sure seemed to think they were Christians. Right? That's how Calvin explains it. Is that God gave them faith just temporarily. Right? So once you start doing that three-card monte, where it's like, okay, yeah, you can, it becomes unfalsifiable, and think about it from the perspective of their big trump card that they're always claiming is, oh, we have assurance of our salvation and you don't. Okay, how can you have assurance of your salvation if you can think you're a Christian and not really be one? If that's possible, if you can think you're a Christian but really you're not one because you're not going to persevere, then how do you have any assurance? Right? So it shoots itself in the foot, the whole concept, right? So not only is it just a hideously dumb way to read 1 John, right? Like it's illogical nonsense theologically as well. It's just an Ouroboros, right? Eating its own tail. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that verse in 1 John about they went out with Romans because they were not of us. So are on my screen. So are Moon Knights. And Deadpool's, as he huffs gun barrel. So I don't know if people have been ad smacked yet now. But I'll go ahead and give the ad spiel just so it'll be done and I won't have to worry about it again.
I've seen wonders out there in the cosmos few humans will ever behold.
So,
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
if you have been getting hit,
Try to make it yours.
if you've been getting hit by ads, or if you have been hit, if you're scared you're going to be hit by ads, I'm not asking anyone for money, but if you have Amazon Prime, you get a free Twitch sub every month. You can use that free Twitch sub on this channel. You will not get hit by ads. You can watch my streams without fear, and you don't have to pay anything. So that is an option available to you. Done with spiel. I wouldn't attach a huge amount of theological import to those elements or any other elements of the Liturgy of St. James in their peculiarity. It's not in the sense that, I mean, obviously all elements of liturgy convey certain things. Though that can go a little haywire too sometimes. We'll get to that in a second. In that, I don't think those differences in tradition actually reflect a different theology. As evidenced by the fact, for example, that there is not a different stance on iconography taken by the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, right? Despite the not having an iconostasy. And iconostases have taken different forms historically in different countries and different churches. You can look at rune screens in England and other things like that. So the differences in local traditions, even in liturgical elements like that, I wouldn't read too much into. Also, you have to be a little careful. Well, there's some of that too, in terms of them being reconstructions. There is a little bit of that. Especially, that's why I have never celebrated it. Father Andrew has celebrated it, got permission to celebrate it. But to me, I have no lived connection to that liturgy. That's not the liturgy I serve on Sundays. It's not the liturgy I serve on feast days. It's not the liturgy I pray. So, me doing it like on St. James feast day, yeah, it might be neat, but to me, I would feel like I was LARPing. You know, it wouldn't feel natural to me. So yeah, there are elements, especially the iconostasis thing, because of course there are iconostases in Patriarch of Jerusalem churches. They've been celebrating the liturgy of St. James in those churches for, you know, a whole lot of centuries minimally, with the iconostases of various forms. So yeah, the Anglicans got in there with a lot of those texts, and where there was a lack of clarity in the text, which there often is, our ancient manuscripts of liturgies famously leave out all the rubrics.
I'm more resilient than you think.
So, this is one of the problems. This is one of the problems with the Western Rite, frankly. Everybody asks, like, well, why are they doing, like, a sort of quasi-Anglican thing? Why are they just doing a pre-schism Latin liturgy? Right? The reason they're not doing a pre-schism Latin liturgy is we don't have any rubrics for pre-schism Latin liturgies, because they didn't write them down. So we don't know how they were celebrated. And so the old Anglican rite they're using and the later Latin rite that they're using are basically textually, by the time they're done with them, textually virtually identical to pre-schism Latin liturgies, but they have the advantage of having rubrics. that allows them to celebrate them. And better that they use later rubrics that were actually used in the West than that they make up or invent rubrics. Or try to attach Eastern Rite rubrics to Western texts. I mean, the whole thing is a problem in terms of the Western Rite, but that's why they're not just like, oh, we'll just all use, you know, a 5th century Latin Rite. Well, we don't have the rubrics for that, so they use a text that's basically the same, but then the rubrics come from later. They're the earliest ones we have. But there were probably some developments in the rubrics, because there always are. Even so, for example, even within the Russian Orthodox Church, like between the Kievan school and the Moscow school, there are like major rubrical differences. They're using the exact same text of the liturgy, but their rubrics are different in certain places. So yeah, there's those kind of details. Those were things that were. That's an example. That's a real legit example of oral tradition, where the texts were all kept and written down, but the rubrics were trained from one generation of priests and deacons to the next. Right? People learned how. They didn't have like a seminary, really. You learned to serve by serving in the church, and you learned from the priest who you learned from, who handed down to you the way to serve that he was taught by the priest he learned from. Right? And so the rubrics existed for most of Christian history in oral tradition. And that's true with the Liturgy of St. James, too. But so all that is to say, when someone like Philip Schaff is putting together these ancient liturgical texts, what he does is he sort of, where there's doubt, which is in a lot of the rubrics, he reads in a lot of Anglican reconstructions of the early church, basically, because that's his tradition, right? He's not doing it nefariously. That's just what he does. So the phrase separation of church and state was first used by Thomas Jefferson, that great theologian and editor of the Bible, and
I've seen wonders out there in the cosmos few humans will ever behold.
So, frankly, a lot of the stuff that's come out in the
A
lot of stuff that's come out recently in the Epstein files, like Thomas Jefferson was doing that a few hundred years ago. So all around bad person, but he's the one who coined the term separation of church and state. Yes, I have asked people, what would you say if I told you that I had proof that a president of the United States or the Democratic Party had a 15-year-old sex slave chained up in his cellar, and that when he got that sex slave pregnant, he trafficked their children into slavery? And they're like, what? You know, like it's Pizzagate or something. I'm like, no, that's Thomas Jefferson. That's and everyone knows he did that. Like, it's in the historical record.
I'm not ready to give up.
This is why I made that comment about getting rid of Monticello. I don't think we need to remember or celebrate that guy. Virulent opponent and hater of Christianity too.
This is real firepower.
So, but anyway, yeah, he coined the term the separation of church and state. But that didn't come out of nowhere. That came out of a long American tradition, primarily the Baptist tradition, right? And that in and of itself emerged from the 30 Years' War, the Treaty of Westphalia, the wars of religion in Europe, which were Catholics killing Protestants. And if you know anything about early Baptist history, both Catholics and Protestants were killing Baptists. and imprisoning them. So, yeah, right. So the Anabaptist and Baptist traditions
The moon haunts you.
were very wanted to have what they called at the time, which isn't the same as the current definition, but a secularly based society. They did not want official religions, right? And that carried over to the United States, because in the early United States, each of the colonies and then the states, had an official religion, right? Like Pennsylvania was Quaker, et cetera, et cetera. They all had official state religions. And dissidents were frequently expelled, right, if you weren't part of that religion. And so the Baptists, again, in America, ended up on the wrong side of that stick, right? And wanted... So for them, it was secular meant non-sectarian Christian, right? They weren't saying, like, hey, they weren't real keen on, like, Muslims and Jewish people. Let's be real. This is, the 18th century. But they didn't want the particularities of the different Christian sects to have the force of law and be enforced on members of Christian minorities, right? Minority Christian sects. And so...
Tremble before fast. The moon haunts you. I'm doing this my way.
Well, you can't expect to win them all.
And so you get cross purposes there, right? But so George Washington was on the same page, likely because he was a Mason. If you read his speech to the New York synagogue, where he says to the Jewish community, tolerance is not enough. Think about that in terms of, right, of other religions. So, yeah. So, the reality is, if you ask me on a theoretical level, do I believe in the separation of church and state? On the theoretical level, I would probably say no. I would probably say that, like, the Byzantine system of Symphonia is better. But on a practical level, as an Orthodox Christian in the United States, I very much like the idea of the separation of church and state. Because it's all that's keeping the evangelicals from putting us out of business. Don't make any mistake, okay? Don't make any mistake. Any Orthodox Christian who argues for Christian nationalism is a useful idiot. Okay? Because quote-unquote Christian nationalism is not going to be some kind of ecumenical version of Christianity. It's going to be the evangelicals, okay? The evangelicals do not think that we are Christians. They don't, okay? Congressman Joe Wilson said it on the record. Mike Huckabee said it on the record. We're not Christians, according to them, okay? They think our icons are idols. Part of what they want to outlaw with their Christian nationalism is idolatry. That's not just the Hindus they're going to go after. It's not just the Buddhists. It's us. Okay? They think we're necromancers. They think we're not Christians. They're going to shut down our churches in their... Doug Wilson will shut down every Orthodox church if he became, the Christian nationalist leader of the United States. On day 2. That's why I say those people are being useful idiots. The evangelicals are happy to have them help them get power, but as soon as they get power, they're going to turn on those Orthodox Christian nationalists, and they're not going to care that they help them get power. Okay? They're not your friends. I'm not enough of an ecumenist, and I'm way too jaded to think that they're on our side, and they're our friends. They're not. They've come out and said so, publicly, recently. Said we're not Christians. So, since we're, maybe getting now to be 1% of the U.S. population, I think the separation of church and state is going to be a good thing for us, for the U.S. church, for a long time to come. If we make America Orthodox, I will be first in line to say, now that America is an Orthodox country, we should do away with it. But until then, as long as we're a tiny minority, we need that. Right? Because if we don't have that as a religious minority in this country, I'm telling you, martyrdom is next. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the Orthodox Emperor of the United States at some distant point in the future would do with regard to those other sects when they're reduced to tiny minorities. I know that, like in Russia, the only religions that are allowed to operate in Russia are religions that were already established in Russia before the revolution, before the communist revolution, Bolshevik revolution. So new religions can't come in and propagate themselves. But like the Baptists who were there before the revolution are still allowed to operate. The Roman Catholics, the Muslims in the Islamic region, Jewish synagogues, but no new religions. So I imagine there would be some kind of thing like that, right? That would be worked out. But other religions would probably not be allowed to propagate themselves. So yeah, any liberal secularist would say, I don't really believe in the separation of church and state. I just want it because it's advantageous to me at the moment. And I say yes. Meshuggah, I like some of their stuff. Some of their stuff, not as much. But yeah, now I've really ticked off a lot of the internet by once again denouncing. I'm not even denouncing Christian nationalism, really. It's more of a practical thing of the Christian nationalist movement in the United States is an evangelical movement that is hostile to orthodoxy. So Orthodox people should not be a part of it. Totem Book is going well. I'm hoping to have the manuscript submitted by the end of the month to Ancient Faith. But February is a short month, and we're going to kick it in the first week of Lent, so it may end up being sometime in March. We'll see what happens. Yeah, Kanukistan is its own beast up there. Okay, don't tell anybody, but I don't actually listen to any Ancient Faith podcasts. I'm not hostile to ancient faith, obviously, or I wouldn't be there. I don't read many ancient faith books either, but that's because they're not aimed at me, right? Like, I'm not the target audience for most ancient faith podcasts. The podcasts that are aimed at like my type of audience are the ones I do. So I don't listen to myself. I already know all the things I know. But yeah, so that's why. It's not that I'm averse or I think they're bad. It's just they're not aimed at me. Like, there are a lot of people who get a lot out of listening to the Lowe's. The Lowe's stuff isn't aimed at jaded 50-year-old Gen X priests, right? Like, so, and the same thing with the books. Most of the books I read now, honestly, I'm down to mostly just reading primary sources. Most secondary sources, like scholarly journal articles and books that I read, I kind of skim. You can read journal articles. Here's the trick to reading journal articles and academic books really fast. You just read the first and last sentence of each paragraph. So you can go buzz through those kind of secondary scholarly academic sources really fast that way. Yeah. Mostly I'm interested in, the Bible itself, the church fathers themselves. That's one of the reasons why people ask me for these secondary source questions. Where can I read more about this? And I have trouble coming up with good secondary source recommendations because I don't read a lot of them. It's not that they aren't there. I'm sure they're there. But, like, I don't read a lot of them. I don't know when the book project with Doc Branson is actually coming out. I kind of thought it was coming out in January, but I don't think it has yet. So I don't know. It's supposed to come out the first part of this year. Lots of things can happen in the whole printing process and everything. So as soon as I actually know something about that, I'll let everybody know right away. As soon as I know something more. And am allowed to say something more. But there's not something I know that I'm not allowed to say. I don't know most of the Patristic Network crew. I'm familiar with Father Josiah. Like, he and I have talked. We see each other at, like, Antiochian clergy things. We're not like pals who call each other and talk on the phone or something. But, like, we know who each other... We say hi. We chit-chat a little bit when we run into each other somewhere. So we're acquaintances, I guess you could say. Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be the last game. If you've been watching the stream, you know what that means. You guys get to pick the character I play for the last game. First character I see in the chat. Okay, I'm playing Hawkeye, I guess. This will get ugly. So I want to answer that question about the West, but it got cut off. So if you could repost only the second half of it. I would play Superman if he was in a Marvel Comics game, somehow. Maybe when Injustice 3 comes out, I'll stream that and I can play Superman. Yeah, so you reposted the first half of the question again. It gets cut off. I need this. Oh, there we go. Okay.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3,
well,
2.
So the problem with this whole... Where's Hawkeye?
Try to make it yours.
The problem with this whole narrative of saving the West is... First of all, I'm not entirely sure what the West is, and that the West is just sort of this construct. You know, because if you get a Western civilization textbook, right? The Western civilization textbook is going to start with, like, ancient Sumer, and then draw this through line, right, from that to post-war United States world hegemony. Like it's this direct through line. Sort of like the whole 19th century German, you know, all of history is progressing toward 19th century German culture and society. Right? And that, of course, isn't strictly speaking true. But also, you're pulling together a lot of things like, is Greece Western now? Because we were talking about Christianity, of course. Greece is Eastern Christianity. But ancient Greece is the West. Right? And, well, and so this is another area of concern. Is that people want to talk about, like, European culture. So, like, Europe and its former colonies. But you notice, like, their former colonies in Asia and Africa aren't included. It's just their former colonies that are populated by white people. And this is part of the thing. So, the whole concept of whiteness comes into the picture. And the problem with the concept of whiteness is the problem with the idea that there is a European culture. There is not a European culture. If anyone who thinks that has never been to Europe and doesn't know any European history, okay? Different parts of Europe have hated each other, invaded each other, slaughtered each other for many centuries. As one French scholar that I was listening to in an interview recently said, Americans don't understand how much Europeans are capable of despising the person from the next village. Like, there is not... So, I'm Dutch. The Netherlands, everybody who's not Fries hates the Frisians. And the Netherlands is like the size of a postage stamp. Right? So even if you're talking about Dutch culture, the Dutch would say that doesn't include the Frisians. They would say the Fries are their own thing and have their own culture. No, we don't like that. So you get these weird co-locations that aren't real, right?
Maximum pulse!
Yeah. And, you know, I see these people talking about European culture or white culture online, and then they'll show this cascade of images that's like statues from ancient Greece and then like Italian Renaissance stuff. And I'm like, wait, so now Italians are white? When did that happen? Right? Like, Southern Europeans were not white until very, very recently. Apparently now they get to be white. Northern Europeans have a lot of slurs for, say, Italians and French people and other Southern Europeans. Look up the anti-Greek riots in Toronto. Greek people, Southern Europeans, because they're Orthodox and not Protestant, suffered persecution. So there's now this weird idea of there's a European culture or a white culture. So this idea of Europeanness and whiteness get lumped together. And so, again, I don't know what that is. I think that's a false construct. And so I don't know exactly why that needs saving and from who. Right, well, yeah, see, whiteness cuts both ways. The concept of whiteness isn't just a club wielded against not people who are outside that category. It's also now a club used against the people who are seen to fall into that category. That's why I don't know that it's a helpful concept. And frankly, the core of my issue with the whole mode of discourse is that I think people are giving credit to whiteness or Europeanness, whatever that is, or Westernness or Western culture. They're giving credit to that for a whole bunch of things that are really Christianity. The European culture did not produce the first hospitals. White people did not produce the first hospitals. Christians produced the first hospitals. Right? So it concerns me when I see people identifying with secular cultures and perceived races and these kinds of things, these kinds of constructs, rather than with Christianity. Sometimes even over against Christianity. Like this whole online debate that they had about interracial marriage. Like, marry an Orthodox Christian person. Don't marry a non-Christian. Like, that's it. Right? Like, that's your Christ Church. Those are your people. Okay? The idea that I, as a Dutchman, have less in common with my friend Father Paul Abernathy, my fellow Orthodox priest, because he's black. I have less in common with him, even though we both stand before Christ's altar and celebrate the Eucharist. I have less in common with him than I do with some Dutch atheist whoremonger in the Netherlands, because he and I are Dutch and have the same culture, the same skin color, is absurd. Is absurd. And I think, frankly, heretical in the way it demeans the Eucharist and demeans Christ and demeans the reality of Christianity. Right? Some Dutchman in the red light district has nothing in common to me compared to what I have in common with Orthodox priests who are Japanese or Ugandan or Greek or Russian. Right? Those are my people. Those are my brothers. Right? Not people who happen to have been raised eating the same foods as me. Right? So I want to deconstruct those categories for everyone's sake. So, yeah, I don't know how many people I just alienated with that rant, but that was the last game. So thanks, everybody.